I love your
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The choice could not be more stark. In the second and final round of France's presidential election, voters have before them two candidates. Macron, he is an arch-Europhile, and Le Pen, a Eurosceptic. This is truly momentous for France, Europe, and the Western world. Cross-talking the French presidential election, I'm joined by my guest in Paris, John Laughlin. He is the Director of Studies at the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation. And we have Pepe Escobar. He is an independent political analyst and author. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. We have two guests, and I want you guys to be able to talk as much as you want. We usually have three guests here, so please give us the thick description, because I think as a matter of fact, I know Western media is really covering this election in a very poor fashion, but that's to be expected. John Laughlin, let me go to you first here. This is a campaign about globalists versus people supporting sovereigntists, we can call them. That is the big story here. You're not getting that in the mainstream media. Lay out the land for us. Go ahead, John.
Well, what we see, I think, in this election is a successful attempt by the system. In other words, by the elites, the European elites, the financial elites, the globalist elites, to shake off an old skin, rather like a snake, and to slither out in new form. The new form being, of course, Emmanuel Macron. Macron, who presents himself as a new face, who is a new face, who's young, who doesn't come from a traditional party, who, of course, left one of François Hollande's governments to form his own movement, who's breaking the mold on the surface, is in reality the continuity candidate. He's the continuity candidate. This is the most depressing thing about the French election, is that people, 8 million people, have been convinced to vote for a man who doesn't say what his policies are, who pretends to embody change where in fact he embodies the most total continuity. You know, they used to say that France was a regime of absolute monarchy tempered by regicide. I would say, in fact, it was a regime of complete continuity and conservatism in the worst sense of the term, hiding underneath an appearance of change, an appearance of movement. And that's really what's at stake in this election.
Pepe, Macron, he strikes me as kind of like a cyborg. You know, he doesn't say much at all, and what he does say, I don't have a clue what he's talking about. It's just a bunch of cliches. And he's talking about Europe in unity. Well, I think we see after one election after another that's not really what, I mean, that these cliches is not really cutting the job anymore, okay? France is in crisis. The Western world is in crisis. And they turn to this guy? I mean, he's kind of a cross of Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio. Go ahead, Pepe.
Look, he's a hologram. Holograms don't talk, as you know. Even in Hollywood, it's very complicated to give them a voice. But it's Peter and John. John nailed it, the basic terms of this packaging, but it's an extremely clever and very dangerous packaging, because let's start from the beginning. Emmanuel Macron is an énarque, so you know, he studied in the ENA. That's the #1 school of national administration in France. That's the top school that forms the cadres that work for the French government. It's what Pierre Bourdieu used to call the state nobility. So Macron was formed in the state nobility. He went to the Ministry of Finance. This is what everybody that gets their diploma from ENA goes. Then he started to get the attention of some older guys and ideologists, in fact, like Jacques Attali, which was one of the key advisors to François Mitterrand. And Attali was the guy who almost single-handedly turned the socialists in France into neoliberals.
Right.
But there are many other characters on the side as well. They're very important, and they supported Macron from the beginning, because for the French ruling class, at least for the past 10 years, if not 15, their project is to like John said, make a crossing between left and right.
Right.
No wonder Macron, all the times he says, I'm not left and I'm not right. And turn it into a third force that will get most of the left, most of the right, and control French politics for the next, not even decades, but century, in fact. And Macron, now we are at this stage.
Yeah, but to Pepe, you know,
I hate
to.
It's so complex because the packaging.
I know, and the packaging is, and I don't want to use overly American terms here, but that he sounds like a nothing burger. Okay, and that's what I get from it here. John, let me go back to you because, you know, when we look at the race here, the way it was run is that anyone but her, anyone but Le Pen, okay? And you have the entire pliant media, the corporate media, you have the entire European aristocracy and their privileges and their very radical, narrow ideology here, and it was against one force here. I'm being willing to say, you know, that she's going to do better in the second. I think we all know she's not going to win, okay? It's too stacked against her. We had Brexit, we have Trump, okay? But nonetheless, she could come out with their greatest nightmare, a movement that could start consolidating against this globalist agenda that denies any kind of meaningful political debate in the Western world anymore. Go ahead, John. Maybe I'm being too optimistic.
Well, I think you are, I'm afraid. I mean, I think that there's zero chance of Marine Le Pen being elected, not least because, frankly, she was defeated in the first round. You know, every single opinion poll for the last 5 years and even beyond the 2012 election under Sarkozy predicted Marine Le Pen winning in the first round. She was regularly put at 26, 27% in the polls. She was supposed to come first in this election. If she had come first, and even more so if she had come first by a large margin or by some kind of margin, it's conceivable, although unlikely, that she may have had people rallying towards her. What happened is that she came second. In other words, she lost. She did less bad. She did less well than the opinion polls had predicted. You know, people used to say for many years that the opinion polls underestimated the support of the National Front. They haven't this time. And yep. She therefore fought a campaign which has not succeeded in its main thing. It's hardly surprising in a world of totally opportunistic politicians that the people from the right, the centre-right, have flocked to support Macron. He, after all, is the winner. And, you know, I think, of course, I personally support, you know, an anti-globalization and pro-sovereignty message. That's no secret for anyone. But, you know, she hasn't fought a good campaign. And, you know, if the left can come up with a jack-in-the-box candidate, you know, a young, good-looking guy who kind of doesn't annoy too many people and attracts people with his vagueness and so on, why the hell can't the right do it? You know, there are plenty of good-looking people who are conservatives. There are plenty of young people. The National Front vote among the young was extremely high, something like 45%. I'm afraid it shows the terrible structural weakness of the French conservatives, that they have managed to divide themselves between, you know, several different candidates, and of course leaving the field open to someone like Macron.
You know, Pepe, but, you know, one of the interesting outcomes of this presidential election is that you have the traditional left and the traditional right fragmenting very, very much here. And that's why I think it's very emblematic of what's going on in Europe in general, is that finally, and we've, all three of us have talked about this in the past, is that the spectrum of left and right is now it's just dust and it's blowing in the wind. We have a very different paradigm coming about. And I have to agree with John, is that, you know, there is a significant conservative constituency in Europe, and good for them, but they're not very well organized. And then some of the people that do speak for them are people all three of us would not talk to. Go ahead, Pepe.
Yes. Look, in terms of France is very particular. What you described is essentially correct, but nuances here in France are, it's very, very subtle. After Sarkozy and Hollande, this means that the traditional right and the traditional left in power have been an absolute disaster.
Right.
So what are we going to have next? The French ruling class wants a reorganization of the political landscape with this rightist, centrist, leftist majority controlling the political process from now on, embodied by Macron. Theoretically, he's going to build a new parliamentary majority. That's a major if. We still don't know if he'll be able to make it. And the other, and there are two counter forces against this supposed majority. One is the Front National, which has, let's say, 20 to 25, 1/4 of the French voters now vote Front National. Marine Le Pen, she can get to 30, 38, maybe even 40 in the second round. That's a lot, because she'll get the disgruntled Fillon voters, the disgruntled Mélenchon voters, and assorted conservatives from all spectrums. Don't forget that the conservatives, they have at least 4 or 5 different factions. And the other very important force, which for the moment nobody's talking about, and it's very significant that he did not call his voters for either to support Macron or Marine. It's Mélenchon. Don't forget that Mélenchon, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, he got at least 8 to 9 points. That's huge. If we had one more week, he would get to 22%, and he would be in the second round. And this is the new left, which is a mix of the old left, mixed with the Greens, of course, and they are going to be the #1 left force against this globalizing French ruling class establishment project for France. And the only credible opposition, apart from the Front National, is going to be the new left led by Mélenchon. And nobody's talking about it for the moment, but he's already thinking about it.
Gentlemen,
and that's why he said,
let me jump in here.
You vote according to your conscience.
We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the French presidential election. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the French presidential election. Okay, John, let me go back to you in Paris. Okay, Macron is a new face, a pretty face, a young face. He said nothing during the campaign that told me that he has any idea about where he wants to bring France. I think I know a lot of personal friends in France that know what is wrong with their country and why this kind of political earthquake is happening. I don't see that he has the answers. He doesn't have a party. I don't see how he's going to make a movement. But I know the forces behind him that will propel him, and it's the same people that have basically created a swamp in the Western world. So I don't see any glimmer of hope here. I mean, okay, Le Pen isn't going to be president. Well, but what about the next day? Go ahead, John.
Well, what Macron will do is to embody and realize, to make real, the caricature which the National Front for years has called the UMPS. UMP was the Conservative Party before it rebranded itself the Republicans, and PS was the Socialist Party. And the National Front used to use this acronym, this invented acronym UMPS, to say that they're all the same. Well, Macron will now show that they are indeed all the same. Because as Pepe said in the first part of the programme, he says he's neither right nor left. Marine Le Pen, by the way, also says she's neither right nor left, which is rather amusing. But I think that he, unlike her, will have no difficulty at all in cherry-picking people from the centre-right and the centre-left, or people who haven't been in government before, to create out of nothing a parliamentary majority which will enable him to govern for 5 years and to keep France on exactly the same policy lines that she has been on for 30 or 40 years. In other words, European integration, the euro, mixture of economic liberalism and social liberalism and so on. So nothing will change. I've had many occasions in this campaign, and particularly after the first round, to quote the famous line from the Leopard, from the Lampedusa's Leopard. Everything has to change so that everything stays the same. That is what Macron is about. He is about creating the appearance of change while assuring the reality of continuity.
Okay, but Pepe, just appearances can only go so far. A pretty face can just go so far, okay? I mean, nice house, but nobody home. That's what I see here. This is what the outcome is going to be here. I don't see that this potentially new president is going to solve the very serious problems that France and the European Union face. I don't see any agenda here at all. And cherry-picking people from the left or right and technocrats, I'm sorry. That's just, you know, that's like a public relations spiel. I don't see that that's going to solve things. I'm going to kind of stick with my position here is that, you know, we will see the forces on the right take a defeat because of the figurehead of Le Pen. And John is absolutely right. There are a lot of different kinds of conservatives in France and in Europe here. But this may be the time to start consolidating where you have much more of a united front, not just under one family and one name, but under a much more coherent ideology that is out there and I think coherent and could work. Go ahead, Pepe.
You touch on the holy grail of this election, Peter. Public relations.
Yeah.
This is a fantastically orchestrated PR coup, in fact. Yeah. And I'll give you probably the name of the most important character in this election that nobody's talking about. Her name is Mimi Marchand. Do you know who is Mimi Marchand? And I'm sure most of our viewers don't.
Well,
She's the queen of the paparazzi in Paris.
Okay.
She has a photo agency, and she controls the coverage of celebrities in France. She built the public persona of Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte. By the way, Brigitte and Mimi now are very good friends, and they are on their SMS 24/7. So this started in the summer of last year when they splashed on the cover of Paris Match a photo of Macron with his wife, 24 years older. Why? Because there were rumors in Paris that Macron was gay. If he's gay, there's no big deal, because former mayor of Paris, Bertrand Delanoë, is gay. Macron is supported by Pierre Berger, one of the wealthiest gays in France, who was a former associate of Yves Saint Laurent. It's not a big deal. But they needed to sell the image of the perfect couple. So Mimi Marchand has been taking care of this image for almost a year now. And she could even go to the Élysée to do a sort of Camelot French version with Brigitte and Emmanuel. So the basics in terms of the PR coup are absolutely fascinating, borrowing, of course, from the American playbook. In terms of business relations, to give an idea, the head of business relations for the Macron campaign is a former investment banker. This means the whole financial universe in France is behind Macron. His backers are from Pascal Lamy, which is a former EU commissioner, to Xavier Niel, which is one of the three owners of Le Monde newspaper. Le Monde controls foreign policy and domestic politics coverage in France. So everybody follows what Le Monde publishes. So it's the way the campaign has been organized is a masterpiece in itself. But like you said, he's not going to be able to deliver, because to form this cross-party new alliance and new party, people will have to be sure that this thing is going to hold, and they are going to be elected or re-elected in the parliamentary elections that come next. And that's not a given at all. Not to mention that this guy is going to hold for a whole quinquennat, 5 years. So there are too many imponderables. Well, and the French ruling class, I'm not sure they thought about the afterwards. It's the Paul Wolfowitz syndrome, right?
They
all
never,
over again, but with French subtitles.
They never do. They never do. They never think about the consequences of their actions. John, let me go back to you. How is this Macron going to deal with youth unemployment? How is he going to deal with immigration? How is he going to deal with border security? How is he going to deal with NATO, Syria? I mean, these are all issues that are very real, and many people in France are interested in them. Again, in this a pretty face with a elderly-looking wife, okay, that might get your attention, you know, for the election. But I mean, how do you rule a country that way? Go ahead.
Peter, we know the answers to those questions. How is he going to deal with unemployment and so on? Because he was a minister in François Hollande's government. And he, like Hollande, his boss, has presided over a rise in unemployment and an already very chronically high level of unemployment, as it has been for generations. Whereas, of course, Hollande promised to reduce it and said that if he didn't reduce it, his mandate would have, come to nothing. So we know what his policies are going to be because he has been in power in this previous regime. I think I totally agree that he's a creation of the media, and it's absolutely desperate to observe that. I think that we unfortunately have to draw a conclusion as well about the susceptibility of the French electorate. I'm not saying the French are special in this regard, but unfortunately we can see that these media tricks work.
Yep.
And one of the big, I would say, defects, unfortunately, of the French electorate, it may be true of other countries as well, is that France is, and this may sound surprising, is an extremely conservative society. And it's a very, very risk-averse society. France does not like change, and France is afraid of change. This is in contrast, I think, to other countries where change does not inspire so much anxiety as it does in France. And that's the reason why, although every single government since the 1970s has lost power at every single election, with the single exception of 2007. So you have this, once again, you have this appearance of change with the reality of continuity. The reason for that is that there are a number of very deep-seated fears in France. And one of these deep-seated fears leads to, quite simply, capitulation towards the problem in question. I'm speaking about immigration.
Yep.
The reason why the French state has been so laxist on immigration for so long is quite simply that the state, the governing levers of the state, are afraid of what will happen in the suburbs if they start to crack down. They're quite simply afraid of it. They're afraid that if the National Front came to power and started to tell the police to clear out certain areas, there would be a civil war. And so instead of confronting issues head-on, the French elite for many decades has done exactly what Leonid Brezhnev did in the Soviet Union, when, as you know, the old joke was about the old Soviet joke about the train is when the train stops going, just close the windows and pretend that everything's okay. Close the curtains and pretend everything is fine.
Okay. You know, Pepe, I think, that's a great joke, and it's longer because there's Khrushchev in it and Stalin, and I'll tell it another time maybe on Facebook. But John got the kernel of it here. But this risk aversion to change, I think it's very, very smart. But Pepe, that means the European Union aristocracy will continue to determine the fate of France and the other member countries. I think that's a really pathetic future, in my opinion.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. The answer to your question is yes, Peter. The first thing Macron is going to do when he's elected, when he goes back to La Rotonde, the brasserie that Lenin, Trotsky, and Hemingway used to go, by the way, is going to be to call with Pascal Lamy, his very good friend Pascal Lamy, former European Commissioner. He's going to call Brussels and say, look, I'm taking the Thalys at 8:19 tomorrow morning, going to discuss our future, and hail to the chief. And the chief, of course, is Brussels. So it's going to be the European Commission, it's going to be the Troika, it's going to be the European Central Bank, it's going to be, for the moment, Angie, whoever comes after Angie. And this is not going to change, because this is the project of the French ruling class as well. It's aligned with the wider European Bilderberg style ruling class. Let me give John the last word here. Give me the one important hang on. Let me give John. Let me give John the last word here.
Yes, go ahead.
John, I bet you tens of millions of French people do not agree with what Pepe just said. I think they want control of their own destiny in their own country.
Yeah, but I think, if you don't mind me finishing on a pessimistic note, the most depressing thing about the whole campaign is that France is about to be governed by a man who, during the campaign, said there is no such thing as French culture. Yeah. But if there's one civilization in the world that defines itself as a civilization, one country in the world that defines itself by its culture, it's this country.
All right, gentlemen.
And for it to be now
we've run out of time, desperately out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Paris, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.